Yo, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Concrete Reality TV, where we strive to know more and do more with what we know. Did you know that the Texas Rebellion in 1835 against Mexico was actually a war about slavery?
The Texas Revolution.
Yes, sir, the Texas Rebellion that we learned about in school has been heavily romanticized and rewritten in many ways. It's typically portrayed as a bunch of white settlers that migrated to Mexico in search of land, liberty, and economic prosperity. Now, a more nuanced explanation reveals a different reality. Turns out that this uprising had been led by a bunch of white slaveholders who had moved from the southern states in the U.S. into the region of Mexico known as Coahuila y Tejas, now known as Texas. It all began in 1821 after Mexico had gained their independence from Spain. The new Mexican government sought to attract settlers to sparsely populated areas like Coahuila y Tejas. So they implemented what was called the impresario system, which allowed individuals to obtain large tracts of lands in exchange for recruiting and settling families. This is where people like Moses Austin and later his son Stephen F. Austin come into play. Moses Austin was a U.S. businessman and a leader in the lead industry. He was also one of the first to obtain permission under the Impresario Act to start bringing over American settlers. Moses' son, Stephen F. Austin, who is more widely known, also received the same permission later on from the Mexican government. Some of the stipulations under this Impresario Act was that they could only bring over up to 300 families. Some of the other terms and conditions were that the settlers had to become Mexican citizens, they had to abide by Mexican law, that also included that pesky slave prohibition, and they also in some cases had to convert to Catholicism. So when these white settlers came over with their Negro slaves, they had no intention of setting them free. Now, of course, when the Mexican government began to put the hammer down on the slave laws, that's when the white folks started saying, hell no. They were proclaiming that the Mexican government was threatening their livelihood and their quote unquote liberties. Liberties to do what? Of course, to own slaves. The simplified version of this conflict is that tensions rose, and by 1835, the settlers decided to rebel. And on March 2nd, 1836, Texas declared its independence from Mexico. And this culminated into what we know as the Texas Revolution. So remember, the Texas Revolution had less to do with liberty and freedom for all and more for, say it with me,
Slavery.
peace.